in Kansas and what was called Indian Territory back then. But that was the story. Like, and my ancestors got a neat little rectangle of 200 acres for free, right? If we were willing to kind of come down and settle there. So that book was really about trying to tell that story. So, and to tell, I think, the stories of white Christian American interaction with both indigenous and African people in this place. And so I ground that book in 3 places: in Mississippi, where I grew up, in Oklahoma, and in Missouri, because I want to make sure it's not just a Southern story, right? This is an American story. So you can't go to northern Minnesota. So I want to kind of tell that story at Minnesota. So I'm going to take one little liberty here, because I want to read just a little bit. I realized on my way down here, I don't know why I didn't put this together. The opening story in the Hindrance of White Supremacy takes place here in St. Louis. And I hadn't really put that together. I was like, oh, wait, like we're going to be standing right where this story happened. So I'm going to read a little bit of this story and we'll get into the conversation, but I think it does help set the stage for kind of what I was up to, and I think also just to help us see the place, that kind of we shall know the truth. The thing I think about sometimes is that one of the things that those of us who have European heritage and we think of ourselves as white Christians, what we've got to figure out how to do, I think, is to see with a kind of double vision. And so when we look around, I think we've got to be able to see more than just like what's apparent. Like, when we see the arch, and we're like right here about what's that all about, right? When we see this courthouse steps, as Reverend Blackman told us yesterday, like, what happened on these courthouse steps, right? And we're right in between those two things right here. And so I want to read this little story that takes place like right here, like literally in the docks down here. I think it helps us set the stage. On May 4th, 1863, the steamboat Northerner pushed up the Mississippi River from St. Louis, bound for Fort Snelling, a military complex north of St. Paul, Minnesota. Just a few miles into the journey, Captain Alfred J. Woods encountered a large handmade raft adrift in the strong currents. Aboard were 76 African Americans, 40 men, 10 women, and 26 children. The leader of the determined group was Robert Hickman, who was attempting to free himself, along with his family and neighbors, from enslavement on a plantation in Boone County, Missouri. That's Columbia, right? Those who are trying to kind of place that, so just a bit west from here. Hickman, a preacher who could both read and write, had seen newspaper accounts of President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation 4 months earlier. Although the proclamation did not apply to Missouri because it was under Union control, this news nonetheless inspired him to begin making plans to escape north. The Hickman party aimed to reach free soil by way of the river, which was by then safely controlled by the Union Army. They embarked under cover of darkness on the moonless night of May 3rd, but because their makeshift raft was not equipped with sails or oars, they drifted in the wrong direction before encountering the Northern. Seeing the floundering party with so many children on board, Captain Woods asked if they needed assistance. Sympathetic to their plight and knowing that the strains of the Civil War had left Minnesota with a labor shortage, Woods ordered the raft to be securely tied to the steamboat and offered to take them as far as its final destination. Neither Woods nor Hickman anticipated the vitriol that awaited them. On May 5th, the Northern approached the levee in Lowertown on the outskirts of St. Paul. And this is way north. As local dock workers, mostly Irish, caught sight of the self-emancipated African Americans, commonly referred to as contraband by whites, on the trailing raft, they became increasingly agitated, seeing them as competition for jobs. As word spread, a threatening crowd gathered on the levee. The commotion was so great that St. Paul police arrived on the scene. But after assessing the situation, they sided with the mob and threatened to arrest not the Irish rabble-rousers, but the black asylum seekers, should they disembark. Captain Woods ordered the boat with his trailing raft to steam on to Fort Snelling. There, Hickman and his party came ashore with that incident on May 5th, but they were met with an unexpected sight. Hundreds of disheveled Native Americans were huddled together, forcibly assembled near the docks. The desperate and anxious crowd they encountered were part of an original group numbering more than 1,600, mostly women, children, and elderly Dakota people, who had been held under guard all winter at a miserable encampment below Fort Snelling. Unbeknownst to them, Minnesota government officials and military leaders were awaiting the spring thaw that would allow for their mass deportation downriver from their ancestral homelands to a miserable reservation in Nebraska territory. By the time the ice family melted and the river's levels rose, hundreds had died. A group of 770 Dakota people had been shipped off the day before on another steamer at the Davenport. Having set the Hitman party safely ashore and unloaded the wagons and supplies from the military fort, Captain Woods ordered preparations to receive his next cargo. 547 Dakota people, whom he was transporting for the fee of $25 per head, plus 10 cents a day for sustenance. Soldiers from Fort Snelling herded the raging remnant aboard, the ragtag remnant aboard the Northerner like so many cattle, as one observer put it. As they pulled away, a local minister's wife remarked, "May God have mercy on them, for they can expect none from man." Neither Hickman and his companions nor the Dakota people would have had the perspective to realize they were witnessing a momentous final chapter in both chattel slavery in the U.S. and Indian removal in Minnesota. They would not have grasped the paradox that the two groups represented that afternoon on the banks of the Mississippi River. That the end of bondage for Hickman's band also marked the last vestige of sovereignty for the Dakota people. And they would certainly have been unaware that in the closing weeks of 1862, just 5 months earlier, President Lincoln was simultaneously considering two documents that would dramatically change the fates of each group: a warrant for the mass execution of 38 Dakota men and the Emancipation Proclamation. This encounter on May 5th, 1863 contains multiple narrative streams, each of which tells a different story about America. The question is, which do we follow? Do we tell the story of Fort Snelling, the military outpost established to protect the westward expansion of the settler colonialism? Do we embark back down the Mississippi River to Missouri and the story of enslaved Africans in the South? Do we push upriver from St. Paul to its headwaters and stories of indigenous people populating this land for millennia? Or do we portage east and across the larger waters connected to the homelands of Europeans who first set foot on these shores just a few hundred years ago? Each narrative pushes back to a different beginning.